Hey everyone, this is the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com. A viewer asked for help on the tricky exercise on page 182 of the outstanding Traditional Logic textbook Socratic Logic by Dr. Peter Kreeft. Let's go through it together. Now this deals with what is called immediate inference. So we're going to review that and then work on the exercise. Now how immediate inference is dealt with in traditional logic is slightly different than how it is dealt with in modern contemporary logic. The definitions are a little bit different, so we're going to work within the traditional logic paradigm here. And there's a lot of interesting material, a lot of things to learn, and it's definitely worth knowing immediate inference to improve your logical reasoning skills. In immediate inference, we're not really deriving any new knowledge per se. We have a single premise, and from that single premise, we just derive another proposition. That's it. We're taking a single premise to restate what we already know from that single proposition into a new proposition of another form. Now, in fact, it might be logically equivalent. Regardless, it's not like a categorical syllogism when we're actually deriving something new, some new knowledge by interconnecting two distinct premises. Now, in traditional logic, the two most important types of immediate inference are conversion and obversion. In conversion, we're flipping the subject term and the predicate term. Sometimes we can do that straightforwardly without a problem. It's valid. Other times we can't. And other times we only can with certain modifications. So let's consider some standard propositions like no SRP. Now that can be converted in a valid, legitimate way to no PRS. And really, when it comes down to it, in this case, those are logically equivalent propositions. They really say the same thing. Consider the example no dogs are cats with no cats are dogs. So here we have a conversion. The subject and predicate terms are flipped, dogs and cats, and this is legitimate because there's a mutual exclusivity here, right, between dogs and cats. No dogs are cats, well, therefore no cats are dogs. That's good. And likewise with the proposition sum S RP. That can be legitimately, validly converted to some PRS. We could appeal to our intuition with an example. Some birds are singers with some singers are birds. It's good. The subject and predicate terms are flipped. We're great. No problem here with this particular affirmative proposition. And likewise with the no SRP, which is a negative universal proposition. On the other hand, all SRP can only validly be converted to some PRS. So here we had to modify the quantity from universal to particular. We can't go from all SRP to all PRS. That's illegitimate. For example, all roses are flowers. That will validly convert to some flowers are roses. Notice that in this universal affirmative proposition, we can only convert it if we move to a affirmative particular proposition. Clearly, if we said all roses are flowers, we couldn't say all flowers are roses. That's just false. So we have to modify the quantity there. Now with some S are not P, there's no way we can really convert that. Okay, so we have conversion. Then we have obversion, where we're negating the predicate, and then we change the quality. And obversion will validly work with all propositions, all main categorical propositions. So all SRP, that can be obverted to no S are non-P. So notice that we're negating the predicate. So we're getting that non-P, and we're also changing the quality. So here we have originally something that's affirmative, and over here we have something that's negative. So for example, all writers are literate. We can avert that to get no writers are illiterate. Although sometimes I wonder about that to be sure. But notice that that is a valid aversion. So we went from all writers are affirmative to no writers are negative. Okay, and the predicate literate has been negated to get illiterate. Consider some S are P. Well, that could be averted to some S are not non-P. For example, some books are interesting. If we avert that, we get some books are not non-interesting. Be careful with the double negation, that can throw us off. But we do have a logical equivalency here. But note, for example, this here, if we go back to conversion, this proposition and this proposition are not logically equivalent. Whereas this and this are logically equivalent. This and this are logically equivalent. Okay. No SRP. If we avert that, we get all S are non-P. For example, no reptiles are warm-blooded animals. That averts to all reptiles are non-warm-blooded animals. And then we have some S are not P. That averts to some S are non-P. For example, some men are not fit. That averts to some men are unfit. Another type of immediate inference is contraposition. Now, I should warn all of you from the outset, this is not how contemporary contraposition is defined. If you pick up an old traditional logic textbook, oftentimes contraposition will be defined differently than a contemporary modern textbook. Don't be confused. So right now we're going to stick to a more traditional definition. And essentially, we can think about contraposition as having two operations. Take your initial proposition, engage in obversion, and then with that result, engage in conversion, and then you have contraposition. You've derived the contraposed proposition. And essentially, we're going to flip the subject and the predicate, and then the new subject is going to be negated. For instance, consider the universal affirmative proposition all SRP. Well, that will contrapose as no non-PRS. So notice that the subject and predicate terms are flipped, and also the new subject is negated. So we have that non-P. For example, all doctors are educated. That would contrapose as no uneducated people are doctors. That makes sense. How about this? Some S are not P. Well, that would contrapose as some non-P are S. For example, some politicians are not honest. Will contrapose as some dishonest people are politicians. With no SRP, so we have a universal negative proposition, contrapose that, and we get some non-PRS. However, with a particular affirmative proposition, some SRP, you can't contrapose that in a valid way. As I said, we can think about contraposition as obtained by doing two operations, obversion and then conversion. So for instance, let's think about all SRP, the universal affirmative proposition. We'll symbolize that as SAP. If we avert that, we're going to negate that predicate. So we're going to have to change the quality to get SEP complement. And then if we convert that, we're going to flip the subject and the predicate, and we can do that legitimately with a negative universal proposition. So we get P complement ES. In other words, no non-PRS. So we've engaged in aversion and then conversion, and we have our contraposed proposition. Now for all of these, by the way, how do we know, for example, that this here is valid? Well, we could think about distribution. That's one way to do it. That is to say, is the term distributed? Do we know its full extension? And I have articles on this and other videos on this on my YouTube channel that gets more in depth with that. Finally, let's jump into the tricky exercise on pages 182 to 183 of Socratic Logic. Have we proved that some students who flunk logic will never die? 1. Let us assume that all men are mortal. I think we can all agree to that as a true proposition. 2. Some of those men are wise, so it follows that all wise men are mortal. Again, I think we can all agree to that. 3. With obversion, it then follows no wise men are immortal. 4. With conversion, it then follows no immortal beings are wise men. 5. If that's true, then by contradiction, it must be false that some immortal beings are wise men. 6. With aversion, some immortal beings are not unwise men is likewise false. 7. But if that's false, then by contradiction it must be true that all immortal beings are unwise men. 8. With conversion, it follows some unwise men are immortal beings. Is that a good argument? What went wrong? If you so desire, pause the video and try to figure out where the mistake in reasoning occurred. Here's a hint. It was with immediate inference. An error was made with immediate inference, either with conversion or with obversion. Here's another hint. If you're going to engage in obversion, where you're going to negate a predicate, you have to negate the entire predicate. So notice line 6. That wasn't obverted properly because the entire predicate must be negated. So we're thinking about the proposition, some immortal beings are wise men. Now, if we're going to engage in an obversion, then we have to negate not just wise to get unwise, we have to negate the entire predicate of wise men. We can't just negate wise, we have to negate wise men. So here we have violated a rule of logic, and that error, so to speak, carries through to our absurd conclusion that some unwise men are immortal beings. So that's where the mistake has been made. If you are interested, I do have some references on immediate inference at my website, amateurlogician.com. You'll find there a verbal style traditional logic tutorial, and entries 15, 16, and 17 are on immediate inference. And 16 in particular is on traditional immediate inference. There are some prerequisites. For instance, entries 7, 8, and 9. Entry 7 is on categorical propositions. 8 deals with negations and complements within categorical propositions. And 9 is on distribution. And understanding distribution will justify immediate inference. You'll then see why an immediate inference is valid or invalid. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please let me know in the comment section below. If you want to see more videos where I work through problems from this textbook or another, also let me know. And you can support me by buying me a cup of coffee, so to speak. I would really much appreciate that and be grateful if you did. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching and be well.